Welcome to our Sound for Video session. It is the 27th of April, 2016, and I'd like to welcome everybody that's watching in person, live, or watching later. Either way, glad to be able to chat for a while. So, today there were a few things we wanted to cover. First of all, we had some questions from a couple of our friends, and then I also wanted to talk a little bit about gear versus skill, which is kind of a probably not a fair it's probably not fair to set those up as polar opposites, one versus the other, but, I just to kinda make a point, but it'll be a basis for, I think, a good discussion, hopefully. So, let me, let's just dive into some questions here really quickly, and first, I'll share my screen so you can see this. All right, here we go. We have 2 questions. First from Mark, who is actually here today, but for reasons that I cannot explain, I can't hear you, Mark. Apologies for that. But Mark, you asked a great question. So let me just read what you wrote here. In a previous session regarding using MP3 royalty-free music, you mentioned that YouTube changes video to 44.1 kilohertz, referring specifically to the audio that comes with the video. Therefore, there is no benefit to transforming 44.1 kilohertz audio to 48 kilohertz to match the dialogue recorded on my Tascam recorder. And we should, I think you said, export at the YouTube standard of 44.1 kilohertz. I then considered recording at 44.1 kilohertz on the Tascam so that the audio tracks match. It doesn't seem to work as Final Cut Pro 10 seems to always export at 48 kilohertz when I share to HD 720p H.264 format. Is there a way to export the final video to at 44.1, and does it matter? That is a great set of questions. So, yes, I actually did something. Let me just show you here. I actually just looked this up again because I wanted to double check it. But if we look here, this is one of the support pages for Google, specifically for YouTube. And what it refers to here, kind of the recommended upload and coding settings. So, obviously for your video, you want MP4. And then for the audio codec, and I don't know if this is outdated or not, but it does say here a sample rate of 96 kilohertz or 48 kilohertz. Interesting. And when I looked previously for the advanced, we're going to do a search here for YouTube advanced encoding settings. There used to be a separate page. These are the live encoder settings. And I don't know if that's the same here. 1080p. It doesn't. Oh, see here, audio sample rate 44.1 kilohertz. So it looks to me like YouTube is a little bit on the schizophrenic side when it comes to their recommendations as to what you should upload your videos in terms of the audio sample rate. Now, my experience has been, and based on other people I've talked to, that when you actually intercept one of the YouTube streams, it's actually playing back at 44.1 kilohertz. So it's odd to me that they're still recommending that you upload to 48 kilohertz. Um, it seems like other companies are kind of making that choice now that we live in a world where mobile devices kind of reign. I did notice that, for example, when I shot video on my iPhone, that the video file that it produces actually saves the audio to a 44.1 kilohertz sample rate. So, and now when you play back YouTube videos, typically it plays them back from my experience at 44.1 kilohertz. So I'm not sure why they would encourage you to upload at 96 or 48 kilohertz, because then they're going to have to do some resampling to get it down to the sample rate that they're going to play it back at. Not that and different people feel differently about this. YouTube, from my experience, it actually does a decent job. I haven't noticed massive artifacting on my own videos that I've uploaded. Um, but that kind of takes me to another topic that I wanted to talk about for just a minute here. So there was at some point some audiophiles that kind of conducted a little bit of a, I guess, a kind of a test. And what they did is they took some audio and they used very high quality um, resampling algorithms. So they had the same audio in 44.1 kilohertz, in 48 kilohertz, and even 96 kilohertz. And they played all these back to um, people that were self-professed audiophiles. And they asked them if they could tell a difference. And so they played each one and they said, okay, was that the 44.1 kilohertz, 48 kilohertz, or 96 kilohertz? And as it turned out, the uh, the audio files were they only got about a 50%. They were right about 50% of the time when a file was played back to them. So that's right in line with random chance, or close. Actually, I think, and I apologize. I think I take that back. I think it was 44.1 and 96 that they played back. So just the two. They had to choose between the two, and most of them were right. Well, overall, on average, they got it right about 50% of the time. So even audiophiles don't seem to be able to tell the difference. Now, that's a slightly different thing in terms of, um, the actual playback and the recording. But my experience has been, I don't notice a huge difference. What I would not recommend is doing a bunch of resampling back and forth and back and forth. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest recording at 44.1, only to export at 48 kilohertz in your video editing nonlinear editor, and then upload it to YouTube, where then gets converted back to 44.1. I think if you do enough of that, you could run into some issues. So that's one thing to consider. So, Mark, I think in terms of your question, um, the kind of the issue that you're experiencing right now is really kind of Final Cut Pro 10 specific, where when you go to export it, it's exporting it at 48 kilohertz. Now, the reason for that is that when you choose the Final Cut Pro comes with a limited set of presets that you can use to do the exporting, and you're exporting to one of the HD formats, a 720p, which is fine. Um, and the original specification for HD, at least on television, from my understanding, and on actually, I don't know about television, but certainly for DVD and then Blu-ray, and if it's HD, of course, it's Blu-ray. The specification was actually for 48 kilohertz audio, but in light of the fact that, again, Apple's devices, at least the iPhone, that's the funny thing, I guess, the iPhone records at 44.1 for HD video. Final Cut Pro 10, under their other products, is actually exporting at 48 kilohertz when you do, any sort of video editing. YouTube is suggesting that you upload at 96 or 48 kilohertz, and yet they're playing back at 44.1 kilohertz. So they're doing some resampling there at some point when, after you upload your video. So I have to say at this point, I'm pretty thoroughly confused. But here is one thing to consider. Again, I think the main strategy is stay away from resampling if you can. If it can't be avoided, it can't be avoided. I think your strategy to record the voice or the dialogue at 44.1, if the music is already at 44.1, is a good one. The work around that, from my understanding, is Final Cut Pro 10 comes with this limited set of export presets. To get more advanced options where you could actually specify the sample rate for the audio, I think you actually have to use Apple Compressor, which is that add-on product. And I think it's another $50 or something like that. I personally have not bought it, so I just record everything at 48. If I have a music track, invariably the ones that I've used have been 48 kilohertz. It exports at 48, and then there's that last resampling that's done by YouTube in the cases where I upload to YouTube. So that's how I sort of minimize the resampling in my workflow. But I definitely understand where you're coming from, Mark. And the problem is of course, Compressor is a $50 add-on. So I believe that Compressor gives you that additional ability. There may be a trial version if you go to Apple's website. So that's worth a check just to confirm that it actually will do that. But my understanding is you can change the sample rate if you use that. So there's some sort of practical advice. Again, I think the upshot is try to avoid resampling if you can. That's probably the most important thing. So and if you do have to resample, try to keep it to one time. YouTube actually, I think, does a pretty decent job resampling audio, for YouTube. Ideally, people buy these very expensive hardware encoders that will actually do the conversion, and people get really hardcore about it. Again, based on that study and based on my own personal experience, I don't hear a huge difference, but I would just stay away from resampling too many times. So thanks for that, Mark. That was a good question. Next question here. Let's go back to our page. And Gary asked a very interesting question as well, which I think leads very well into our topic for today. And he asks, from your experience, what would be the least you would pay for an audio recorder that you could rely on to record good audio without all of the bells and whistles? And that's a pretty interesting question, Gary, and I appreciate that. And again, I think it leads pretty well into our topic for today. So I think you've all probably heard me talk about. I have a Zoom H1, that tiny little handy recorder with the two built-in mics and a 3.5 millimeter mic input, I think you can rely on that. I've had very good experience with that. I've never had any failures with it. In terms of battery life, it does really, really well. So I've never run into issues with it running out. I mean, it really seems to hold its charge well. It doesn't use a whole lot of battery. I've actually taken the Zoom H1 on multiple occasions. I've put it on grooms for weddings and stuck it in their pocket. I've used it also in interview situations for my corporate videos. So I think that there's definitely a case for that. That's one thing. In terms of XLR inputs, I have a pretty strong opinion on that, and we can talk about specific gear here. And I don't want anyone to walk away thinking I do or don't like specific companies, but let me just say this. If you're going to spend somewhere I think for a recorder with an XLR input, or one or more XLR inputs, in my experience, my favorite of the least expensive ones is probably the Tascam DR60D Mark II. I think you've all heard me say that 100,000 times. So that probably comes as no surprise to you. I would stay away from the Zoom H4n, and I am a Zoom H4n owner. I think it can be a fine recorder, but I think with some microphones that don't have a particularly strong output, that the H4n struggles, and you end up with quite a rather noisy recording overall, because its preamps just aren't quite as strong. It's a couple generations back in terms of that preamp design, and Zoom has come a long way since then, and the newer recorders I think are really, really well. So do really well. So I would say on the Zoom side, if you're looking for a recorder with XLR inputs, I'd start with the Zoom H5 and go up from there. The Zoom F8 are fantastic preamplifiers from my experience. I think the Zoom H5 and the H6 both have the same generation of preamplifier, and those both sound quite good to me. Very much, I think, in line with the Tascam DR60D Mark II. Same on the Tascam side. Anything above the DR60D Mark II, I would stay away from. At this point, I would stay away from the DR40, which they're still producing and selling. I don't think they're producing the DR100 Mark II anymore. And if you did come across one, I don't think that would be a great investment. You'd be better off, again, spending a little bit more. So on the Zoom side, I think that puts you somewhere around the $200 to $250 range. And then for the Tascam side, the DR60D Mark II, you can often find that. I've seen it as low as $150, although I think that the typical price is somewhere closer to $175 to $200 US. So also, Zoom just released a new kind of interesting product that's worth consideration as well. It's actually not a recorder, so it's not something you could use in the field very effectively, but it is an audio interface that hooks to your computer via USB. So if you are recording in a studio or at home near your computer, and you just need to go straight into the computer anyway, they have a couple of new products that I would love to show you here. And so let me just pull these up here. And I actually dropped by the Zoom booth at the NAB show this year and got a chance to see these firsthand. I haven't had a chance to actually try them or really kind of test them, but I am planning to get my hands on them. There are a couple of them. There's a Zoom U44 and there's a Zoom U, what's the other one? Is it a 24? I think it's a 24. Yeah, 24 is the other one. They're just slightly different. The 44 is kind of the higher end one, but it only runs $200 US once it actually is available. Right now you can see it's just for pre-order, but you can see it has two microphone preamplifiers. Actually, let's see if we can get that bigger. Yeah, we can. Two microphone preamplifiers. It has a little clip signal here. You've got your outputs, your phone controls. Here's the gain. So it's kind of a cool little device. So this would record directly to your computer. It also has kind of, on the typical Zoom side. Actually, this is interesting. So it's got MIDI inputs and outputs as well for those that do music production. It's also got these, here are the main outs here on 1/4 inch. So this is balanced out. You have a headphone jack. You also have some line outs on RCA. So these are going to be unbalanced here. But you can also plug in on the 44 at least. You can use all of Zoom's accessories, and I believe I don't know if it comes with, yes, maybe it does come with that, but you can use these different microphones. So here's the XY microphone. Here is the shotgun microphone. So it's kind of an interesting device. Again, only in cases where you're going to be recording close to your computer. This one is interesting from the standpoint that you could use this. Well, I should say this one's interesting, and I think probably a viable option from the standpoint that it's using the same generation preamplifiers as the H6 and the H5. So those should be some pretty nice, clean preamplifiers as well. So that's something to consider as well. But what I want to say is kind of my point in all that is that you can spend, a Zoom H1, I think you can actually get those now somewhere around $80 US sometimes. I think the normal pricing is 100. Sometimes they're on sale as low as 80. You can actually make some pretty good audio with those. And I think at that point, what it comes down to is your skills, your ability to understand how to capture and record great sound. And for those of you that have taken the course, I think you've been through a lot of this, so none of that'll be new to you. But I just encourage people to not lose sight of the fact that your skill is more important. I would say I'm gonna go out on a limb and say it's more important than what gear you have. Now, obviously, you have to have gear. It's not really a skills versus gear, and that's a kind of a misnomer. But I think a lot of times we sometimes think of it in those terms. But really, you have to have gear. But more importantly, you have to know how to use it and to use it effectively. So, for example, if I'll get a question a lot of times, hey, I got this microphone, everything sounds pretty good, but I'm still getting lots of echo and lots of reverb. What do I do? Well, what you do is you do something to the room. You either choose a different room that doesn't have so much echo and reverb. You throw some sound blankets down on the floor and hang them up off camera if you're going to be doing a piece where you're going to be on camera. Anything you can do to mellow out those reverberations, any of the sounds slapping off of the walls and coming back. So that's a perfect example of skill. So maybe instead of buying a $700 microphone, if your whole budget is, somewhere around that range, maybe you should buy a less expensive microphone and also invest in some sound blankets. And you should spend the time, and I should spend the time. This is preaching as much to me as to anybody else here, but we need to spend the time figuring out a good place to record. So if you are going to shoot a piece, it makes sense, if you can, in as much as possible, to go to the location beforehand. Or if it's up to you to choose the location, go find a location. Go do some tests. Put yourself in the room, start clapping, check to see how much reverberation there is in that room. And if there's a lot of it, even though it may be visually beautiful, you're going to pull your people out of the story or the interview or whatever it is very quickly if your visuals are beautiful, but your audio is a reverberating mess. unless that serves the specific piece that you're doing, unless you want that sound and want the reverb. Maybe you do want to be in a cathedral and have that sound in some cases. But oftentimes, if it's supposed to be sort of an intimate conversation type of thing, usually the reverb isn't helping. So go ahead of time and figure out where you can record. Look for rooms that may be carpeted, that where you can hang up blankets off camera. Maybe you have to also invest in some stands that you may not have enough stands right now to hang blankets. Maybe you need to get some Century stands, and those are kind of a lifetime investment. I mean, yeah, they're expensive. They're $150 each, roughly, in the U.S. But those are stands that you could use those for 30 years easily, and they make it very easy to hang sound blankets and be able to mellow out a room. So I didn't want to rant about that, but I do sometimes get the question, and it's a legitimate question coming from someone who's a beginner. But we all need to move past that stage pretty quickly, and that is, what microphone should I buy to get the most awesome sound? Well, it depends on 100,000 different things. It depends on where you're going to record, and have you thought anything about, where you're going to record, first of all, and what the quality of that room is for recording. And, did you leave some budget for other things? Did you leave budget for, again, blankets, anything you need to do to really kind of mellow out that sound? If you're going to be recording outside on a frequent basis, and there are going to be cases where it's going to be windy, do you have wind protection for your shotgun microphone? Or do you have wind protection for your lavalier? Or do you have a strategy in mind for how maybe you're going to hide the lavalier under your clothing, and that's going to work for you? Those are all valid strategies, but you definitely need to think about those things. And so all of us, not all of us, I certainly, and I think some of us kind of get trapped into thinking, maybe instead of this $250 microphone, I should have bought a $600 microphone and things would have been so much better. Well, maybe and maybe not, but again, think about the things around. I laugh when I think of the people that buy $3,000 cameras, and then to them they're kind of put out when they have to spend more than $30 on a lavalier microphone, and it's like, well, really think about your goals. And recognize how important sound is. Recognize that there are a lot of things you can do, and also recognize this: investing in audio gear is a much better investment than a camera body. Yeah, you have to have a camera at some point, but if you invest in a good recorder, that's going to last a lot longer than any sort of camera body is going to last in terms of the technology. Because the technology on the audio side doesn't seem, it's not like a new model comes out every year and that new model is ground shattering and you have to get that new model. That's not really the case. I mean, we on the low end, I think we are seeing a little bit of that, but I think we're getting to a point now where a lot of the affordable recorders, and I would say anything in the $200 and up range, is really can be quite good. So those are some thoughts on that front. Yeah, so it does kind of make me laugh when you hear about these guys that are pouring money into their cameras. They don't have any money for lighting. They don't have any money for sound left. And that's cool. If you're going to make those kind of videos where you're just testing your camera and you go to some downtown area and you shoot some really beautiful footage and you just put some music behind it, if that's your goal, great. All you really need is a camera and a video editing app of some sort, and maybe some access to some good music to put behind it without violating any copyrights. But if you really are going to tell a story in some way, whatever way that may be, and there's going to be dialogue, it's worth investing some thought, first of all, into sound, some investment in yourself in terms of sound. And I'm always really inspired when people ask questions here for the session, because then I know they're thinking about it and you guys are, really trying to find ways to make your productions better and tell your story more effectively. One thing I also wanted to kind of talk about a little bit more was I did go, again, as I mentioned last week, I had just gotten back from NAB 2016 in Las Vegas last week when we did our session last week. But some other thoughts I wanted to share from things I learned from a couple of people I talked to. So the two people that really left a big impression on me were two people who are longtime professionals and very well regarded in the production sound world for film and video. Number one, Jeff Wexler, who, incidentally, if you aren't aware of jwsoundgroup.net, it's a set of forums online where not all, but a lot of the professional mixers for film and television will actually go to ask questions and kind of interact with each other and kind of learn from each other. That's worth looking at. I would encourage you not to post any questions right away, but it's worth joining. Or if you just want to lurk and just look, you don't have to join. You can just go look at it. But there's a lot to learn there, and I've learned a lot there as well. So that actually is Jeff Wexler's website. So he actually has done sound for a ton of movies over the years, and he's kind of close to retirement age at this point. But if you go look at his IMDb page, you'll be pretty impressed. So you've probably seen some of his movies before, and he's obviously a very skilled audio mixer and engineer. So one of the things that he said that kind of was pretty interesting to me, and I've heard him say this before as well, is that when you're booming a microphone, one of the things that we kind of stress in the course is that you've got to get that microphone way closer than most newbies think. You've got to get that boom microphone up in close. And in fact, I'm going to take a little detour here. We'll come back to Jeff Wexler. But I also talked to a guy by the name of Senator Michaels. And yes, his first name is Senator. He actually changed his name and that's another story that'll be coming out on one of the videos that I post. I actually interviewed Senator at NAB, and we came away with, it was just a wonderful, I want to say conversation, but it wasn't a conversation. He just talked, and it was perfect because he had so much great insight to share. But one of the things he said is he actually spent a lot of time in Hawaii. You'll recognize, if you've been to Hawaii, this is the hang loose symbol that they use. But he says you can use that as a guide for how close your shotgun microphone needs to be to your talent. Just put your thumb up here on your forehead, and where the pinky is ideally where you'll place the tip of the shotgun microphone or the boom microphone. And that doesn't come as a surprise to any of us, really. But what but that was one thing he pointed out. And then going back to Jeff Wexler, what Jeff said was interesting is he said that, yes, typically that's what you're going to want to do when you want a very intimate dialogue sound. And then he said when the camera's going to pull back and you're going to get maybe a wider shot, it actually can be okay to move the boom microphone away just a little bit. So it's not jammed right up at the frame line, but you can move it back a little bit to kind of get the sound to match the frame. This is a master you're talking, and I'm not at that level yet. So that was kind of a really interesting, insightful thing that he said there. So just something to kind of think about. Again, there's something about skills versus gear. When you get to a certain point where you can start finessing things like that, I think you're on a pretty good path. So then back to Senator Michaels, one of the things that he said that really kind of stuck with me was, and this is in contrast, you can see these guys have different opinions on some things, but one of the things that Senator Michaels said was that don't worry about booming in a wide shot. It's totally doable. You don't have to, sweat that and throw a lavalier on somebody just because you're doing a wide shot necessarily. And here, incidentally, one of the things that most of these guys agreed on was that lavaliers are for backup. They're never your primary one when you're doing a formal narrative film. Obviously, when you're doing something more like sort of reality TV, booming's not really an option when you've got 15 people running around in various directions. So you've got to lav them up at that point. But if you're doing a proper narrative where you're doing everything that a boom mic is your number one choice, lavalier is always a backup choice. But what Senator Michael said was that on the wide shots, he said, don't worry about that because all the good directors, and if you're not working with a great director, or if you're working with someone that's a little less experienced, what you can say is if you're getting ready to do a shot where maybe it's going to be an establishing shot, and then it's going to come into a close-up for some dialogue, he said, not a problem. You'll always do double coverage, so you don't have to worry about trying to boom that wide shot. So what he means by that in practical terms is that if you have a wide establishing shot where there's 20 feet between the top of the head of the actor and the top of the frame, what you can do is go ahead and have them speak their lines on that shot, but you'll also do double coverage on this close-up shot. So on the close-up shot, you'll essentially reverse time, and that person will deliver all of their lines that you'll actually hear during the wide shot. And probably what the editor will do is on the wide shot, they'll show the person start talking, but the audio is coming from the close-up that you shot, and then they'll cut to the close-up, and then they'll continue. So that was an interesting insight as well. I thought it was very interesting. And his point on that was you can almost always have a boom where you need it because you'll get double coverage even on the wide shots, and you'll also do the double coverage. You'll also do a close-up of that and be able to capture all of those lines. So really, really interesting insights and kind of things that just make basic sense at some level. So I really enjoyed that talk, and keep your eyes on the channel. I haven't decided where I'm going to post that one yet. I think my regular YouTube channel, since it's an hour-long interview, that's not going to fly there. Most people on YouTube don't have more than a 3.5-minute attention span. So I'll probably have to either maybe do kind of a very condensed version over on that channel, and then maybe here on the Google Plus page, we'll put the full interview with Senator Michaels so you can check that out. So those are some thoughts to consider. I hope those were helpful for you. I hope that, I know it's a little challenging at times when you're out there actually doing this stuff, especially if you're a one-man band, which I totally understand. Being able to really invest in your audio is a tricky thing at that point. So, but take the time, hang in there, learn the skills, and so that when you get on the spot, you're actually shooting, you're in a good position where you can get everything done that you need to and make that audio as best as you can. So thanks everyone for joining. And if you've got any questions, you know where to find me. You can, for those in the class, of course, you can email me directly. Everyone else, love to hear from you as well. You can contact me on the Google Plus page or over on YouTube, either way, whatever works for you. Keep shooting and keep recording great audio. We'll talk to you guys later.